Okay, we're talking about leadership. Well, we're talking about groups, actually. We'll be talking about leadership in a minute. 1961, James Stoner, and this is James Stoner, I found a picture of it, discovered that despite common knowledge that group behavior is more conservative than individual leadership, studies show that the opposite was true. Individual leaders are afraid. Oh, I forgot my telephone. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I plugged it in downstairs and I forgot to put it back in my pocket. Individual leaders get blamed for stuff. But when you've got a committee, they're less likely to be able to blame somebody. Of course, if you've got 5 or 6 people on the committee and people are saying, why in the world did you do this? Somebody would say, well, it wasn't me, it was all the other guys. I voted against it. So because of that, what they discovered was that committees tended to be more liberal. They tended to take riskier chances with things. And this is known as the risky shift phenomenon. And it was a huge surprise to just about everybody. Everyone thought that, of course, it was the individual leaders, it was these tyrants that were causing all the problems. If you think about the Trump administration, I hate to pick on Donald Trump all the time, but if you think about the Trump administration, when he first became president, he did more controversial things then than he's doing now. It's fair for us to ask why. Why in the world is he more controversial? Was he more controversial in the beginning than he is now? Is he more sensitive to people complaining? And the answer is probably no. He's not more sensitive. He's not sensitive about hardly anything. People can just give him a hard time and he seems to just run off his back. Actually, what did they say? He'll hit back 10 times harder. So why in the world, in the beginning, was he more controversial than he is today? Why was he doing more risky things in the beginning?
Because he had a lot of supporters.
He did. He had a lot of supporters, and it was more like a group. Steve Bannon was one of his advisors. He was surrounded by other individuals to deflect the blame. So when he was part of a group, he was more likely to make more controversial decisions. Now he seems to be losing people fairly readily, and it's fairly obvious that he's the one that's making the decision. So because of that, he is doing fewer and fewer controversial things. Really kind of fascinating. Groups, committees tend to enhance pre-existing tendencies. They strengthen the member's average tendency rather than split within the group. And this is known as group polarization. So if we put a committee together, they will probably compromise. What will potentially happen is they will compromise and they will take a stand, and that's known as group polarization. If you put 12 people, if you create a jury and you put them in a room, eventually, of course, they will deliberate, and they normally come up with a decision. About 75% of the time, they will come up with a decision. And this is because of group polarization. But the reality is that if somebody goes in, and this is one of the reasons why they have jury consultants. If the jury goes in, if somebody goes in with a staunch idea about something, you won't be able to change their idea. And that's one of the reasons why we have jury consultants, because they try to put together a jury that will make the decision that they want them to make. So they look at personality attributes and to determine if this is an individual that is going to be in favor of quitting or whatever. And that's why they use jury consultants. Group polarization is evident on college campuses where different fraternities maintain select reputations that tend to attract and polarize their members. So you'll have, if you go to the University of of Arizona or ASU, and you look at the fraternities, you'll see that one is a sporting fraternity. Almost a lot of their people that are in that fraternity are athletes. Another one will be an academic fraternity. Another one will be a party fraternity. Another one will be a screwed up fraternity. And this is very evident on my college campus where I was an undergraduate. Because we were 75% Greek. And because we were 75% Greek, we had a lot of fraternities, and each one had their own personalities. If you were a rich kid, you went to Sigma Chi. If you were an athlete, you went to Phi Delta Theta, or the Phi Deltas were athletes. The Brainiacs were the Betas, the Beta Theta Pi's. They were the Brainiacs. But if you were wealthy, you went to Sigma Chi, which is kind of interesting. I was independent, obviously. I was independent. I don't know if I could have become a college professor if I had been a fraternity person. But as it turned out, and this is something that I've learned going back to some of my college reunions, a lot of these guys made connections in their fraternity. One individual is a millionaire. He's an international banker. And he started banking because he joined one of his fraternity brothers, got him into the Navy, and when he went to New York, he was stationed in Norfolk, went up to New York to visit his friend, and he took him to a party where he met an international banker who hired him right out of the Navy. So it was all these connections that he was making that allowed him to go into international banking. And he's a brilliant fellow, and he's a really nice guy. But that's how it was done. I was an independent, of course. Independents tend to be more liberal. Not only that, but this is back in the 60s and 70s. And in the 60s, the fraternities, most of the fraternities were established in the South. And because of that, they were segregated. So we only had one fraternity that was integrated. So all of the African Americans on campus lived in the independent dorms. So it was almost like a fraternity in itself. Since the civil rights movement had just exploded in the United States, it was a very educational thing that happened for us. Unfortunately, of course, the fraternity guys, they weren't around anybody that was black unless they were unless they ran track or played on the basketball team or the football team. That's the only time they were around black people, and in classes, of course. But they didn't live with these guys, and of course that's really how you learn about people is by living with them and finding out what they're thinking, eating dinner with them, sitting down at the same table and having discussions, creating dialogue. Delinquency is more likely where there are like-minded youth, and in fact will increase at a greater level than the sum of its members. One of the reasons vandalism is so prevalent in areas where there are gangs is because they will try to one-up one another. So one person will destroy something, and another person will tag something, and another person will blow something up or burn something down. So if they were alone and vandalizing, they would do a lot less damage. But when they are around each other, they tend to do more damage. A good example is there was a gang that, I can't even remember what they called it. They were doing something, and they would go into Central Park at night, and they would rave or something, and there was a word for it. Anyway, one night they caught a female jogger, and they started raping her, and of course it turned into gang rape. If there hadn't been so many people around, and there hadn't been so many people that were egging the rest of the people on, then it probably wouldn't have been as bad as it was. As it turned out, they did a lot of physical damage to her. They gave her a concussion and brain damage from the beatings that they were giving her, as horrible as that sounds. Terrorism does not spontaneously erupt, but is a result of like-minded people who evolve to violence. And of course, we put people together, and if they have a tendency, like a tendency to hate or a tendency to be violent, of course, it's like boiling soup. Last night, not last night, but the night before, I made chili, and I'm boiling my chili, and I had about that much room from the top, and as I was boiling it, it was bubbling out of my pan, and I got it all over the stove, and I got a big mess that I have to clean up. And that's kind of the way that this works. So if you put people together with a common idea, it may start out, we don't really like these other people, we'd like to do something about it. Eventually it may turn into violence, and that's one of the reasons why around the world we've got the CIA and the NSA and different organizations are watching groups of individuals to see when they become violent. And that's one of the things that they're trying to observe. When will they become so? When will they foment so much anger that they will become violent and potentially strike out, maybe perform some kind of terrorist attack? Normally, when an organization does become violent, we're very much aware of what's going on. We know that that's going to happen. We just don't know when. We don't know where. But we know that this organization is becoming violent. If you read the newspaper last night, Afghanistan is starting to blow up again. And one of the reasons, there was a video that was in the news agencies that had a video dealing with an attack on an ISIS cell in Afghanistan. But one of the things that's happening over there is that the Taliban, of course, have been fairly quiet for, actually they've been discussing whether they would come into to the government with the Afghans. And of course the violent members of Taliban who want to maintain the revolution, the civil war, they have joined ISIS. So now we've got this ISIS-Taliban hybrid that's taking place over there. And actually, right now is the most dangerous time because they have started to foment violence. Great person theory purports that certain key personality traits make a person a good leader. Regardless of the situation, this person will be a good leader. A critical question is, what is the role of the leader in group decision making? The question of what makes a great leader has intrigued psychologists, historians, and political scientists for an extended length of time. What makes a good leader? And of course, we could ask ourselves, is Donald Trump a good leader? Is the reason that he became president of the United States, is it because he was running against people that were weaker than him, that appeared weaker? Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina, if you remember the whole group of individuals standing up there. Which one was the strongest leader? And of course he showed his leadership. Well, how did he show his leadership when he was running for president, when he was running for the Republican nomination? What did he do to show his leadership? Why was he selected over everybody else? Why did he win by so much? It was almost a landslide. People laughed when he declared his nomination. They thought it was a joke. But what did he do to make himself head and shoulders above everybody else? Did he do anything? Is he taller than everybody else?
He promised to make America great again.
Okay.
I think like a lot of people followed him because we just had a black president, and that is almost like literally no-no, and they're like, we need to bring in a white person to
White supremacist.
Yeah. We need to set it straight and tell people, get back in here, wherever, kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, I don't know. politics is ugly.
It is ugly. So how in the world did he show himself to be that leader that could bring us back to where we were supposed to be, I guess?
Oh, the wall.
The wall? Talked about the wall. He's going to build a wall.
Tax cuts. Our new tax reform.
Already signed it at the meeting,
I don't know. That's all we really basically promised.
Let's not look at his promises. Let's look at the way he acted.
Oh, yeah. Arrogant.
Yeah, he acted like, I'm better than everybody else. Not only that, he said I'm better than everybody else. He gave everybody else denigrating nicknames. He called Marco Rubio Little Marco. What did he do? He insulted practically everybody, and this is something that is unheard of in politics. Well, we're going to talk about how he denigrated the female in the race. For a while, the people were saying, well, the Republicans were saying we need a female to run against Hillary Clinton. We need another female to run against Hillary Clinton. And it looked like it was going to be Carly Fiorina. But he was able to show her weaknesses, or he created weaknesses that people accepted. Really kind of fascinating, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Personality and leadership abilities are weakly related. Compared to non-leaders, leaders tend to be slightly more, and this is only slightly more intelligent, slightly more extroverted, slightly more confident, slightly more charismatic. Does that fit Donald Trump? Slightly. Is he more extroverted than all the rest of them? Was he more outgoing than everybody else?
Yeah.
Confident?
Gets the attention, steals the show, the
Sure.
stage, and it's me.
Exactly.
Not you.
Not you. What does he say about his intelligence?
It's more.
I know. He's kind of amazing, isn't he? He claims that he's one of the smartest people in the world. So there you go. All he has to do is say it. He doesn't have to prove it. Surprisingly, few personality characteristics correlate strongly with leadership effectiveness. He was probably the antithesis of Barack Obama. Obama was soft-spoken. He was not only was he African American, but he was also highly intelligent. He's a lawyer. He was on the law review at Harvard. Or was it Yale? I can't remember where he graduated from law school. Anyway, so we've got Donald Trump, who we're not exactly sure what he has done as far as education is concerned. Then we have Barack Obama, and all they talked about was the fact that he was so smart. Simonton in 1987 and then again in 2001 correlated all the factors of effective U.S. presidents and found 3 significant variables. Are you ready for this? One of them is that they are tall. The second one was that they come from a small family. Now, why would coming from a small family be important as far as leadership is concerned?
Their attention is more on the child.
Right.
Right.
Right. So if there's in my family there were 6.
Yeah.
So where was I in that? Could I possibly be a leader if I'm one of 6? Or if I was one of 2? Or if I was an only child? Abraham Lincoln was an only child. He was the only one to survive. His mother had other children, but he was the only one to survive. So they put all their energy into that one kid. They made that kid feel special. There's a documentary about Gary Shandling, the comedian Gary Shandling, on television right now. Really kind of fascinating, because he was really messed up. One of the reasons he was so messed up is because he was one of 2 children, and his brother died. And because his brother died, they put everything into Gary. You know, the mother wouldn't leave him alone. She called him every day, and she wanted to know what was going on, and she was trying to protect him. And he did something very bold. He was a very introverted individual, and he became a stand-up comic, stand-up comedian. He was a writer before, and he was a very good writer. He wrote for Sanford and Son. He wrote for, what was the other show he wrote for? He wrote for several television shows. And he was very successful, but he wanted to become a stand-up comedian. And the first couple of years he was a stand-up comedian, he was terrible. Nobody laughed. I mean, he would go out and do his spiel, and nobody would laugh. It was terrible. And then he found his groove, I guess, and his groove was him acting like him talking about his relationships, because he had very disruptive relationships with women. He wasn't very good with women, as it turned out. So coming from a small family is important. The number of books they published before the election, so that people knew their name. Of course, this was more important than it is today. This isn't going to be nearly as important. But then again, we've got Donald Trump, and he has several books out. I don't know that he's written any of them, but he's co-authored them. They are theoretically his ideas. The Art of the Deal, I think, is one of them. Trump is the title of another one. Wait a minute. I've got a.
He even did like a TV series.
Well, he was on The Apprentice, yeah, for years. And his big thing was, "You're fired." That was his bio.
Oh, and that's what he's doing to
Yeah, and that's what he's doing now. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I thought I saved this, but evidently I don't. Wait a minute, let me go back to Firefox. There they are, okay. Shortest president, James Madison, 5'4". Now, the thing that you need to remember is that he was president in the early 19th century, and the average height in the United States for males was about 5'2", 5'3". And then they really jump up to 5'6". None of these presidents were elected president when they were below average, when the average was close to them. Even James Madison at 5'4" was still tall in his time. So all of these other individuals, you can see they're 5'7", 5'8". I am a direct descendant of these two guys, John Quincy and John Adams. They were 5'7". Guess how tall I am? 5'7". That's right. I know. As funny as that is, or stupid as that is, let's see if we can make this thing go the other way. Oops. Stop doing that. I want to go and find Donald Trump. See where Donald Trump is. I can't make it move over. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I can't make it move. Okay. Anyway, so that's the average height. Tallest president, Abraham Lincoln, at 6'4". Who else was 6'4"? Lyndon Johnson, 6'4". Does anybody know how tall Donald Trump is? Pretty tall. Actually played center on his high school basketball team.
I can see him tall because some of the interviews or something he has to go down to the microphone.
Right.
And whoever he's talking to, he has to lean over.
Right.
Never seen him straight talking eye to eye with somebody. It's usually leaned over.
Right. Yeah, he doesn't like that. He doesn't want to interview with anybody that's actually taller than him. He's actually 6'3". He's got another trick. When he shakes hands with people, he pulls them toward him to show dominance.
That's what my dad does.
Does he? Ugh. I hate to be pulled off my feet, that's not a lot of fun. Anyway, okay, go away. There we go, okay. So the tallest president, Abraham Lincoln, at 6'4", shortest president, James Monroe, at 5'4". And so height has something to do with being president and being from a small family, he said. Okay. Come on. There are two basic styles of leadership. One is transformational leadership and the other is transactional leadership. This is Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was he was in charge of the communist hearings, the anti-communist hearings in the early 1950s. Joe McCarthy, tail gunner Joe. He claimed to be a tail gunner in the United States Air Force during World War II. The reality was he wasn't. He was a clerk. So he wasn't a tail gunner. But he was a senator from Wisconsin. And he wielded a lot of power. He was a transactional type leader. Transactional leaders they set clear and short-term goals, and they reward people who meet them. And of course, he was threatening people, and all he wanted them to do was admit that they to claim that they weren't a communist, or to admit that they were a communist. So those were his goals. And if they agreed with him, if they told him what he wanted to hear, then he rewarded them. A good example is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was at the time, he was the president of SAG in Hollywood, and McCarthy claimed that there were a lot of actors and a lot of writers that were making movies, and these individuals were communists. And he asked Ronald Reagan whether he was a communist or not, and of course he said, "No, I'm not." And he said, do you know of any communists in SAG? And he said yes. And he gave him names, and that's exactly what he wanted. And then he would call these people in, Henry Fonda and whatnot. Francis Farmer was another one. And he would grill them, and they wouldn't admit that they were communists. And then, of course, he blackballed them. He got them blackballed out of Hollywood. So suddenly they weren't making the movies that they were making before. Francis Farmer stopped making movies completely. Henry Fonda took a hiatus, and he didn't come back until the late 50s. He went to Broadway. He started acting on Broadway because he couldn't get a job in Hollywood. The writers that were writing were blackballed as well. There were 10 of them, and they never wrote again. Actually, there were several of them that wrote under pseudonyms. It was the only way they could get work. Transactional leaders do a good job of making sure that the needs of the organization are met and that things run smoothly, and that's a transactional leader. Transformational leaders, on the other hand, are leaders who inspire followers to focus on common long-term goals. It's transformational leaders, however, who think outside the box. Normally they think outside the box. So they're the innovative leaders. They're the ones that change things. Transactional leaders keep things the same, or they go backwards. But transformational leaders are the ones that think outside the box, and they're the ones that change the world. And if we look at some of the transformational leaders that we've had throughout history, we can see how innovative these individuals actually were. Walt Disney changed the way that they did cartoons. He created acceptable fantasies that became Disneyland and Disney World. Joan of Arc, of course, changed the Catholic Church. Jesus, of course, changed the Jewish Church. Benjamin Franklin was very innovative as a writer and a publisher. Henry Ford, of course, changed the way that we have transportation around the world. And of course, Bill Gates has made you all computer literate. It's his word. Isn't that what they call It's Word that has changed everything. As a matter of fact, I'm using, this is PowerPoint, and PowerPoint is one of his inventions, not his inventions, of course. He was just the leader, and he surrounded him with people that he allowed to think outside the box, and of course that's what made him the brilliant leader that he is today. Interestingly, he's going to be on Big Bang Theory tonight. Bill Gates is going to be on Big Bang Theory. So I want you to watch him walk, okay? Just watch him walk, because the guy is a nerd. He is probably the quintessential nerd. He walks like this. So watch him walk, and stiff-legged. He's stiff-legged, so it's really, he doesn't have a walking problem. He's just a nerd. It's just the way that he walks. I don't know. It's really interesting. So even if you don't watch it tonight, you can tape it and see. These are things that we couldn't do in the past. We can tape things. Leadership effectiveness depends both on how task-oriented or relationship-oriented the leader is, and on the amount of control and influence the leader has over the group. So it has to do with their leadership style. Are they task-oriented or are they relationship-oriented? Now this becomes very important, because task-oriented people very often will alienate their workforce. And when they alienate their workforce, all of a sudden production declines. And if production declines, of course, now nobody's happy. The workers aren't happy, whoever owns the company isn't happy. So the task-oriented guy is good for select things, but relationship-oriented leaders are important as well. Contingency theory of leadership is the idea that leadership effectiveness depends both on how task-oriented or relationship-oriented the leader is, and on the amount of control and influence the leader has over the group. This theory was developed by the IO psychologist Fred Fiedler, and that's Fred right there. He's an IO psychologist, industrial organizational psychologist. The contingency theory of leadership has been supported in studies of numerous types of leaders, including business managers, looking at business managers, especially college administrators. They've done tons and tons of research on college administrators. Why? Because they're there. These are college professors, and they are doing research as easily as they possibly can. So who are they looking for as far as leadership is concerned? It's easiest to do it on college administrators. They've also looked at military commanders. This is mostly research done by the RAND Corporation. They were trying to determine whether the military commanders were going to be successful in combat or not. As a matter of fact, one of the primary pieces of research was done by the RAND Corporation, trying to determine what characteristics were important as far as Air Force leaders were concerned. The RAND Corporation started as the Air Force Research and Development organization, and then they branched off, and now they're an independent group. But they've looked at military commanders, and this is really quite important if you think about it. Who is going to be, who are you going to allow to lead in the future, and are they going to be somebody like Alexander Haig, who looked like he was about to take over the government back during the Reagan administration? He's the one that, when Reagan was shot, he's the one that came on television and said, "Don't worry, I'm in charge." Well, he was, what was he? Secretary of State at the time, I think. He was Secretary of State, and he was fifth in line for to become the President of the United States. He wasn't next in line. The next in line guy was George Bush, the Vice President, and then of course there was the Speaker of the House, and then the leader of the, not the leader of the Senate. That's the Vice President. But Secretary of State is way down the line. And he came on television and said, "Don't worry, I'm in charge." And of course, it wasn't true. They've also looked at post-managers. Two basic types of leaders, the task-oriented and the relationship-oriented leader. The task-oriented leader is a leader concerned more with getting the job done. Doesn't really care that much about workers' feelings and the relationships he has with the workers. Now this can be, this leader is important in select circumstances. he will get more work done in select circumstances. The relationship-oriented leader is concerned primarily with workers' feelings and relationships, and that is why we call them that. Let me tell you a quick story. My wife, of course, was an Air Force colonel. She was, guess which type of leader my wife was? A task-oriented leader or a relationship-oriented leader?
Task.
Hell no, she's female. What's the probability she's going to be a task-oriented leader? No, she was a relationship-oriented leader. And, you know, if she had been a bossy individual, I don't know that I would have married her. I don't like to be bossed around. Do I look like I like to be bossed around? Task-oriented leaders are most effective in high-control work situations. Leader-subordinate relationships are excellent. The work is structured and well-defined. So if it is a group that needs to get the work done right as quickly as possible, then the task-oriented leader is a really good leader to have. If it's a low-control work situation, the leader-subordinate relationships are poor. The work needing to be done is not clearly defined, and of course the task-oriented leader will be able to structure they will be able to tell people what to do and when to do it and how to do it. Okay, task-oriented leaders. My wife worked as a hospital administrator, so she worked in the hospital. So does a hospital situation, a hospital setting. You've got doctors and nurses, you have sick people, you've got lab techs, you've got x-ray techs, you've got all these people that are working to keep everybody healthy. So does that fit the high control work situation? The work is well structured and well defined? Or does that fit the low control work situation? The work needing to be done is not clearly defined.
High control.
Every patient that comes in is different, and you got to treat them all different.
Well, if you're working in the hospital, you're probably going to have to multitask, and you probably have like a lot of different situations going on, so it would probably be like a high control work situation area.
You've got some of the most intelligent people in the world. Doctors are some of the most intelligent people in the world, at least they think they are.
Well,
So, okay, so you've got all these egos taking place. Okay, so here you are, you're the person that's supposed to be controlling these individuals. So you're the hospital administrator. You're the one that has to get all the doctors to do the right thing. You got and then you've got, underneath the doctors are all these nurses, all these individuals that have all their own problems. One of the biggest problems they have in medicine is the Florence Nightingale effect. Florence Nightingale effect is where a nurse will fall in love with her patients. She falls in love with her patients. And nurses do tend to marry their patients. My mom married, my dad had hemorrhoids, and he was a 4F. He couldn't join the military. So he went in and had his hemorrhoids fixed so that he could join the Army. And my mother was so impressed with that. Here's all these other people looking for an excuse not to have to go to war, and here's my dad fixing his ass so he can get in the war. My mom was real impressed with that. That and the fact that my dad wasn't real pushy. He wasn't. He didn't try to impregnate her the first night that he met her. So she was real impressed with that, and so she fell in love with me. So we've got all these individuals. So we've got all these highly intelligent individuals with a lot of information that most people don't have, right? Medical information, not everybody has that information. So the task-oriented, and this is one of the things we saw, or that my wife saw when she was in service. The task-oriented, most military officers try to be as task-oriented as possible. Because in the military, when the colonel barks, then everybody jumps. I mean, that's the idea. And that's more task-oriented than it is relationship-oriented. But in a hospital setting, you've got all these egos, you've got all these individualists. And so the barking and bossing them around and trying to force them to do things doesn't always work. As a matter of fact, it rarely works. So her job in the military was to put out fires. Some jackass officer that thought he could bully everybody around would go into a hospital situation and he would lose everybody. I mean, the doctors were pissed off, the nurses were pissed off. All the enlisted techs were pissed off. So she would have to go in and she would have to calm everything down just to get the hospital to function. Hospitals don't work if the doctors don't care. So that was her job. Her job was to fix everything. She had to put out fires. Relationship-oriented leaders are most effective in a moderate control work situation where things have to run fairly smoothly. Some attention to poor relationships and hurt feelings is needed. And of course, that was her major job. Was the nurses would come in and say, "The doctor yelled at me," and then she would go to the doctor and he would say, "I didn't yell at her. All I did was tell her to do this." And of course, what she did was get the people to talk to each other. They weren't talking to each other. When a task-oriented leader has alienated his workforce, and this happens all the time, and this is what she did. She would follow, and there were certain doctors, certain hospital administrators that she was following. They would go into a hospital and they would screw everything up, and then she'd have to come in and clean everything up. The hospital efficiency had declined, and she needed to go in and clean things up. And she was very good at it. She was extremely good at it. As a matter of fact, she was up for head of the Corps, head of the Medical Service Corps. So she almost became the head hospital administrator in the United States Air Force. But they had to make a decision. They had to decide whether they were going to have a leader that was came out of headquarters, or whether they were going to have one that came out of the hospitals. And unfortunately, they made the decision, and I don't say this only because she didn't get her star, but unfortunately, they decided to go with the person coming out of headquarters because they could get more things done. They could get more money out of Congress. That's what they went with. And my wife retired in 2001, right after 9/11. She retired in October. And they thought that they had made the right decision, but of course now all of a sudden we went to war. And not only did we go to war, but we went to war on two different fronts. We not only invaded Afghanistan, but we also invaded Iraq. So what they needed was, they didn't need somebody who could get money out of Congress. What they really needed was somebody that understood how hospitals worked. And they didn't have that. So the lady that took over, that got the star instead of my wife, actually was only in the job for about a year before she fell flat on her face, because she didn't understand hospitals. She understood the machinations of how to get money out of Congress, but she didn't understand the rest of it. Anyway, so sometimes relationship-oriented leaders are good, and sometimes task-oriented leaders are good. If you're going into battle, then you certainly don't want to have to talk to people and ask them how they're feeling about going into battle. You don't want to do that. You would need a task-oriented leader at that point. That's the person that you need. Now, how would you say that Donald Trump is a relationship-oriented leader or a task-oriented leader? Yeah.
No feelings, cold, barking.
Insulting everybody. He's pretty good at that, isn't he? We'll see what happens. What did he call the guy who's going, the leader from North Korea? Oh, Rocket Man. He kept calling him Rocket.
It's amazing, the other day he was actually on TV and he actually referred to him as his full name, and he actually used that form of being respectful instead of always referring to him as Rocket Man.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. And he stumbled over the name, if you remember.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not used to being nice to people. It may be difficult for women to achieve leadership positions. Look at Donald Trump's comments and reactions to the candidacy of Carly Fiorina, he was able to marginalize her by attacking her looks. He said that she was ugly. He attacked her voice as being shrill, and he said that her platform was pitter-patter. So he was able to marginalize her, and that's what he did with all the people he was running against, all the Republicans anyway. He tried to do that with, it was kind of hard to do that with Hillary Clinton, because she had such a, she was so successful in politics. She was a Secretary of State, she was a senator from New York, and he, of course, had never been in politics before. But he could pretty much insult people. He could create illusions of individuals by insulting them. And of course, most candidates don't do that, but he did, and he was successful. He tried to do the same thing with the Senate race or the House of Representative race in Pennsylvania, if you remember. He called, what was the guy's name? Sam? His name was Sam, and he called him Sam the Sham. He tried to label him and denigrate him, and it didn't work. And of course, the Democrat won out there, which was a huge surprise, since Trump had taken that region by 20 points, and here he wasn't able to elect a Republican congressman. Many people see good leaders as having agentic traits. They're independent, they're aggressive, they're assertive and competent. The women stereotyped as being communal, having communal traits. So this is the way we see men, this is the way we see women. These are masculine traits, and these are feminine traits. Being friendly, being unselfish, and being expressive. These are female traits, and these are masculine traits. So now we got a problem. So what if the lady is up for the CEO of a very important company? And she's independent, she's aggressive, she's assertive, and she's competent. What happens next? Does she get the job? No, she doesn't get the job. No, because when we look at a female, we want to see somebody that's friendly, unselfish, and expressive. That's what we want to see. Women are in a double bind as leaders. If they are warm and communal, they are perceived as having low leadership potential because it's not masculine. If they are agentic and forceful, they are often perceived negatively for not acting like a woman should. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. In 2014, only 24 of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were women. And the boards of directors of U.S. companies included only 17% women. And this is according to Catalyst in 2014. Things are not much different elsewhere. That 17% figure is actually among the highest in the world, except for Europe. In Norway, we see 41% of the CEOs are female. In Sweden, it's 27%. In Finland, it's 27%. In the United Kingdom, it's 21%. In France, it's 18%. Happiest people in the world. Does anybody know where they come from?
Montana.
Happiest people, what country? It ain't the United States. Happiest people in the world. Any guesses?
France.
I'm sorry?
France.
Close. People in France are very, very happy, but they're not the happiest. They're right up there at the top.
Rome? Is it like in the same area as France and Europe and all that?
Yeah, it's in Europe. It's one of the European countries.
Rome? Rome?
Italy?
Italy?
No.
Amsterdam.
The Netherlands?
Netherlands.
Oh, they watch a lot of pornography.
Okay.
I know. It's weird. After 8:30, it's like pornography all on all their television stations.
Even the newscasts.
Even the newscasts, they do it nude. No, it turns out to be Finland. Finland is the happiest country in the world now. So the people of Finland are happier than anybody else. So they speak their own language, which is kind of Finnish. It's one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn. If a woman's style of leadership is stereotypically masculine in that she is autocratic, bossy, and task-oriented, she is evaluated more negatively than men who have the same style. This is especially true if men are doing the evaluating, because men want to see women as women and men as men. Another danger that women leaders face, because women are perceived as being more communal, they are often thought to be better at managing crises, particularly ones that involve interpersonal problems, such as a conflict between high-level managers. That might seem like a good thing, trusting women leaders to solve problems, but it has a downside in which women are more likely to be put in precarious, high-risk positions where it is difficult to succeed. The reason my wife made colonel is because she was able to go into hospitals and clean them up. She was a relationship-oriented leader, and the task-oriented leaders that she followed really screwed things up. So all she needed to do was make people happy. She really wasn't that good at, well, she's just good at making people feel good about themselves. And that's why she was successful. But unfortunately, every time they had a problem, every time a fire started in one of the Air Force hospitals, guess who got the call? Well, she did. So when it came time to decide who was going to be the leader of the Corps, they didn't see her as positively as they saw this other leader that had more masculine traits. So it was a negative situation. It turned out to be a negative situation because she was seen as a fireman. She was seen as somebody that puts out fires. And if there aren't any fires, is she a good leader? Well, that was the question. And of course, the answer that they came up with was no. This other lady is used to taking care of things when things are working well. My wife was she was somebody that cleaned up after somebody else made a mess. Michelle Ryan and her colleagues have called being put into crisis management roles dealing with interpersonal problems as a glass cliff. And they've looked at this over and over again. The last time was in 2011. Even when women have broken through the glass ceiling into the top leadership positions, they are more likely than men to be put in charge of units that are in crisis and in which the risk of failure is high. Because the problem is, if they don't clean it up, now whose fault is it? Well, it was somebody else created the crisis, they've come in and not been able to fix it, so guess who gets blamed for it? Is it the original guy that created the problem in the beginning, or is it the person that didn't clean it up? And the answer is it's the person that didn't clean it up. So unfortunately, that's this whole glass cliff thing is very, very real for women. In 2014, Mary Barra became the first female CEO of a major global automaker. She became the CEO of General Motors. Within months, she had to announce plans for GM to recall over 11 million cars due to defective design components that the company had known about for over 10 years, for almost 10 years. Could Barra become another example of a woman who broke through a glass ceiling only to find herself on a glass cliff? I think she took over like a month before they declared that they needed to recall all these cars. And if you've got a GM car, you probably got a letter in the mail saying you need to bring it back in, we'll fix it for free. Yeah, so where is the closest GM dealership that you can take your car to? Gallup? I hope it's not Albuquerque.
Gallup or Farmington?
Farmington? If I want to get my Mazda fixed, I have to take it to Albuquerque. Yeah. So here, send over a wrecker to pick up my car and take it to Albuquerque so I can get it fixed. That's going to happen. Anyway, so I don't know. You've got your computer open. Why don't you look up and see who the CEO of General Motors is? Is she still the CEO of General Motors? She only took over in 2014. And the only reason she took over was because she had bad news to give to the people that own GM cars.
It says she's still the...
She's still the CEO?
Yeah.
Okay. 4 years later. Good job, Miss Barrett. Mrs. Barrett, excuse me. Ms. Barrett. Okay, thank you. Whoops, went the wrong direction. Looking at leadership around the world, researchers have discovered that different cultures seek different attributes in their managers. Autonomous leadership, where the workers are independent of superiors and the leader stays distant from the workers, is very popular in Europe, but not in South and Central America. In Europe, that's the way most of the owners and leaders are. They just let you go, and that's the way I like to be treated. I don't want to talk to the dean. I don't want to talk to the provost. I certainly don't want to talk to the president of the college. If I can hide from those people, I will do it. That's why I hate getting in trouble, because then I get called on the carpet, and then I have to talk to these people. So I just want to teach my damn classes and I want people to leave me alone. That's the way I like to do it. I figure, hell, I've been doing this for what, 25 years? I probably know what the hell I'm doing. I'm guessing I do. I've been bossed around by doctors and nurses and all kinds of people. I really don't need to be bossed around anymore.
And patients.
And patients too, yeah, that's a good point. Of course, you can always kill the patients, and then you don't have to worry about them anymore. We try not to do that, but sometimes it happens. There was universal agreement about the value of two leadership qualities, and those leadership qualities are charisma and being team-oriented. Those were the two things. So how does Donald Trump do? Is he charismatic? Is Donald Trump charismatic? Come on, is he charismatic or not?
Yeah, he has the flair, the fire.
I think it's his hair.
The suit, the hair, the smirk. Yeah.
The smirk, exactly. He's got arrogance, and that equates as charisma sometimes. Is he team-oriented?
He's always firing people.
That doesn't sound very team-oriented to me. Good point. And he just fired a couple people yesterday. So, and he fired the the head of the VA, and he replaced him with his own doctor. He did. He replaced him with his own doctor.
God.
Yeah. Okay. That's team-oriented. Anyway. Questions about culture, cultural differences in leadership are receiving increasing attention because in a global economy, work groups are becoming more diverse and managers from different cultures have increasingly frequent contact. One of the problems that we had in the United States, the General Motors, Ford, and Dodge were not building cars that we were buying. And the cars that we were buying that were Dodge and Ford and General Motors were crap. They were bad cars. Dodge came out with, oh God, so many bad cars. What was that thing? Omni? The Omni? Dodge Omni? Piece of garbage. Just a piece of garbage. There was another car that they came out with. Ford came out with the Maverick, the exploding car. The famous exploding car. Chevy's had a bunch of duds. The Monza, they came out with a Chevy Monza that was just, there was a problem. I bought a new Monza because I could get a loan. This is when I was in the service. I bought a new Monza. Within 800 miles, the head gasket blew. Within 800 miles. Luckily, I was able to get it to the dealership with it smoking like a chimney. I mean, it was terrible. And I said, well, I've only had this thing for 800 miles. I've only driven it for 800 miles. Well, what did you do to it? So they're asking me if I've driven it over 55. At that time, 55 was the speed limit all over the United States. They were going to fix it. And then, of course, I guess logic took over. But so the Japanese, of course, were building really good cars, and they were really solid cars, and they would last for an extended length of time. It's one of the reasons why Honda is so popular in the United States, and Toyota. You know, Toyotas and Hondas would last forever. The Isuzu trucks, my God, they're still on the street. You know, they're 30 years old and they've got 500,000 miles on them, and they're still out on the streets. So one of the things that happened was the Japanese started buying into the American automobile industry, and so they started mixing their cars. And to do that, of course, you know, Honda makes cars in Marysville, Ohio. Isuzu used to make cars in Lafayette, Indiana. So in order to do that, they had to send Japanese managers over as people that were running the plants. And of course, the Japanese style of working and the American style of working is not the same. So we had to integrate. They had to figure out how to get the Japanese managers to treat the American workers the way that they wanted to be treated. And it was really kind of fascinating watching this whole process. And over the years, of course, they have melded the two different personalities, the Japanese personality, American personality, and now they do a pretty good job of running the automobile industry. Is there any automobile company in the United States that is owned by people in the United States? Where are the parts made?
Detroit.
Not anymore. You know, if you get a car now, they have to put a thing in your glove compartment telling you how much of the car was made in the United States and how much of it was made overseas. I know, it's kind of exciting. So you open up your glove compartment, you buy a brand new car, you open up the glove compartment, and you get a slip of paper that says 45% of all your parts were made in Mexico. You know, 25% of all your parts were made in Canada, and the rest of your parts were made in the United States. Of course, the whole thing was assembled in the United States, but it wasn't made in the United States. So, you know, it's just one of the things they're doing now. Who owns Dodge? It used to be owned by a German company. Who owns Dodge now? They almost collapsed, you know. Who owns Dodge?
General Motors?
It ain't even American. Fiat owns Dodge.
Kia?
Fiat.
Yeah.
Fiat. Yeah. That's why we're seeing more Fiat 500s on the road. Fiat 500 is the most popular car in the world. There are more Fiat 500s out there, especially in Europe. Practically everybody drives a Fiat. I know, bizarre, isn't it? A social dilemma is a conflict in which the most beneficial action for an individual, if chosen by most people, will have harmful effects on everyone. What is best for an individual is not always best for the group as a whole. You remember there was I can't remember the guy's name. Anyway, he bought a pharmaceutical company, and he started charging, what was it? It was a medication for, I'm standing right in front of the camera. It was a medication for hepatitis, to treat hepatitis. He raised the price 1,200 times. So they were selling it for $40 before. Now all of a sudden they were selling it for $4,800. I know. Scarelli, I think, is the guy's name. Anyway, and he said, well, I just bought it for the profit. So he was helped by selling this stuff for $4,800. There's all these people that have hepatitis C, and they need this medication in order to cure the hepatitis C. So he had them in a bind. Were they going to spend the $4,800 for $40 medicine, or what were they going to do? And of course, he was taken to court. It's taken years. You know, and he was just recently imprisoned for 10 years for fraud and gouging, price gouging. Anyway, so should we be upset with this guy because he wanted to make a profit? Is it okay to make a profit?
It's okay, but
Come on,
gotta-
you
you
just
gotta-
wanted the money.
yeah, then there's probably another side to where, in order to, especially if it's medicine, you want to help people. But if you want to make a profit with like parts and stuff, I think it's okay because you're not hurting nobody's feelings or anything.
Come on, healthcare in the United States is the most expensive healthcare in the world. Why? Because people want to make a profit. Do you think doctors become doctors because they want to help people?
No, they want to make money.
They want to make money.
They want the cheddar.
They want to retire as millionaires. You think I'm kidding?
No.
So is it okay that this guy jacked up the price to $4,800?
No.
Let's vote. What do you think?
If it's what if
Is
it's
it okay for him to make a profit? It all depends on how I ask the question. Is it okay for him to jack up the price to $4,800?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. It is, good, okay, $4,800. We want that man to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
We want that man to make as much money as possible. No? Go ahead, yeah, okay, well, it's okay for people to make money. We've got a president that is a billionaire. Why is he a billionaire? How did he get all of his money? Did he do it in an ethical way?
Well, look at
That's
those
a question we
people
better-
that take buses up to Canada to get their prescriptions filled, like the senior citizens.
Sure.
I mean, my stepmom, my sisters and them, they could go into the drugstore and buy Tylenol 2, which is like Tylenol 3,
Right.
over the counter, and they don't need a prescription. They can get their teeth fixed, they can get surgery, everything free, and I mean, literally, they don't even have
They don't have to be
health
a s-
insurance. They don't have health insurance.
They don't have to be a citizen of Canada?
No, they're citizens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
I know,
citizens.
that's the whole Canadian thing. Yeah,
But the States, I think it's just crazy, and I mean, what are we gonna do if they take away IHS for some of those people that have worked their whole lives for not social security, but worked their whole lives for retirement, and now the IHS is refusing them, so they're put on Medicare. And
Oh, because they're old enough?
yeah,
Okay.
but that Medicare is actually taking their whole check or something. I don't know, they're really messing up with our insurance for the elderly, for the Native Americans right now. It's really bad. Something needs to be done, but first we need to get Trump out of there. Just kidding.
You guys need to be really careful. Trump doesn't like American Indians.
Oh, he doesn't.
I apologize. It's not my fault. I didn't elect him president. Somebody did, but I didn't. I didn't have anything to do with it. I knew this from the beginning. I knew he didn't like American Indians. He tried to, let's see, how does this work? He tried to partner with a group of American Indians so he could open a casino on Indian land, but they wouldn't let him do it. He tried to sue the American Indians because they have certain rights that he couldn't get because he's not native. So you guys can open up casinos any place on your lands, but of course he had to get a permit to open a casino, and that upset him a lot. So he doesn't have very fond feelings for American Indians. So him doing away with IHS is very possible. I mean, literally, it's very, very possible. So you need to be careful. You need to watch this guy.
I think that there's so much controversy with him, that he's not gonna get nothing done. The only thing that he has done since he's been in there is reform the tax thing for the rich people, and I think if we just keep
What more
pushing
does he
at
need
him-
to do? Now he's going to make more money.
Yeah, but I think if we just keep pushing at him and tugging at him, maybe he'll resign.
That's a possibility. Then we get Mike Pence. Okay. So the question is it okay to make a profit? Is even 1,200 times more profit? Is that okay?
It's a lot of cheddar.
Okay, we're going to play a game. I think we're going to play a game. Well, no, first let's talk about Stephen King. Stephen King is a novelist, of course. He decided that what he was going to do, he was going to put one of his novels online for free. And all he said was, look, if you guys give me $1, all you need to do is send me $1. All you have to do is pay $1, or you don't have to pay anything at all. But send me $1. And if 75% of the people that read my novel send me $1, then I will continue writing the novel. That's what the deal was. It was called The Plant. The deal he offered was simple. I've already explained it. Okay. So he would, as long as they continued to reimburse him 75%, he would continue writing the novel. If fewer than 75% of the people paid, he would stop writing and the people would never get the rest of the novel. King had devised a classic social dilemma, a conflict in which most of the beneficial action for an individual will, if chosen by most people, be harmful to everyone. This was the dilemma. So it was actually a social experiment. So 75% of the people had to send him a buck. It's just $1. It was to any individual's financial advantage to download King's novel free of charge and let other people pay. Why should I pay? Let somebody else pay, right? However, if too many people took this approach, everyone would lose because King said he would stop writing the novel. So this was the question. So you wrote the first installment, and more than 75% of the people paid for the first installment. As with any social dilemma, however, people eventually acted in their own self-interest, to the detriment of all. The number of people who paid for their later installments dropped below 75%, and King stopped posting new ones, saying on his website that the novel was on hiatus. So he stopped writing the novel because he told them he wasn't gonna finish the novel unless they paid for it. It's $1. How much does a book cost? Can you buy a book for $1? Eventually this might have cost him $3 or $4. Can you buy a book for $4? Not a new one. Try it sometime. It's going to cost you $12 or $15 or $18, whatever. Okay, so this is. Let me give you another dilemma. This is a prisoner's dilemma. A man and his girlfriend are arrested with 5 pounds of marijuana in their possession. They are separated, of course. They're not allowed to talk to each other. The prosecutor knows that if he can get one to turn, they can charge the other one with possession with the intent to distribute. And that's a 25-year sentence. Otherwise, it is a 5 years and probation for both for possession of marijuana. So that's the deal. 5 years or 25 years. The person who testifies against their significant other will be charged with misdemeanor possession and get probation. So which one will blink first, the man or the woman?
The man
will blink first. So he's going to go ahead and drop a dime on his girlfriend. And she's going to get 25 years and he's going to get probation. This is what they do.
the woman.
It doesn't matter. This is what they do with everybody. This is what is going on with the Mueller investigation. Mueller catches people doing something inaccurate or incorrect or unethical. He indicts them, and he gets them to turn on the other people. What was the guy's name? One of the guys was wearing a wire when he was talking to Scaramucci and Priebus and Bannon, and he was trying to get dirt on the Trump administration. So this is what prosecutors normally do. They try to turn somebody. And if they can turn somebody, that somebody will potentially not serve as much time in prison, but then they will be able to pull in larger fish. And that's what's going on with the Mueller investigation. That's one of the reasons why this thing is exploding all over the place. We've got Flynn that has been indicted. We've got, who else do we have indicted? They just indicted 13 Russians. Of course, the Russians are in Russia, and there's no way we can arrest those guys. But they've still been indicted. They just expelled 60 Russian diplomats. I know. Anyway, so this is a prisoner's dilemma. Are you going to take probation and drop a dime on your significant other? Or are you going to hope that they don't say anything? I don't know. This is a tough one, isn't it? We need to stop right here. We'll pick this up next time, and we'll actually finish. We have more games to play.
Nothing will be the same after
Of course not. That's the whole point.